Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Future of BizTech. I am your host, JC Granger, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Dan Thomson, who is the founder and CEO of Sensay. Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself and what does Sensay do? Who do they help out?
Thanks for having me. So my name's Dan Thomson, founder and CEO at Sensay. I've got a bit of a strange background, mixture of finance, hospitality, Web3, and now AI. And Sensei is actually here as a digital extension of you. It's built around this idea of digital immortality and creating an AI version of yourself to essentially live beyond who we are. But when applied to business concepts and use cases, it's treated as an extension of you, your knowledge, your skills, as a way of supporting you day to day, both in terms of helping you to draft your emails or post your socials, but for businesses as well to have essentially as a website widget or chatbot for sales, customer service, community engagement, and management.
That's amazing. Wait, so let me ask a question here. Does that mean like Steve Jobs, for example, if they inputted all of his recordings, everything he's ever, email he's ever sent, texts and videos, that what they could hire him as a digital, well, not hire, I guess I don't know what you'd pay him, but like a digital consultant for Apple kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, technically you would be hiring because you'd be paying the estate, right? So you'd be paying his family for his likeness because in the US you've got privacy laws
Yeah.
and you is passing off. So it'd be paying the family estate for his likeness, but combined with the company assets, which is his knowledge, his messages, his documents, his thought process and style, and turning that into essentially an AI jobs. And funnily enough, it's actually an example I use for a specific use case for that, which would be imagine Steve Jobs onboarding every new Apple employee and being there as a internal like accompaniment to decisions. So having Steve's feedback on pretty much every presentation you want to give, on every idea that you have as a tool that's there as a immediate feedback to make sure you are sticking to Apple's principles and vision.
That's amazing where the technology is going for that. What types of companies do you find are most interested in what you're offering? Like, who is this for? I mean, it seems like it'd be for so many people, but who is it like? Who does it best help, I should say?
It's a difficult question because it's not just about which businesses to help, it's which industries. And we've identified over 50 different verticals alone that this could be applied to everything from healthcare to education to manufacturing to, gaming. And so where we're up to right now in terms of our development and where our sort of core market is as it stands right now is around essentially small businesses, SMEs, and individual entrepreneurs, everything from business coaches to even small telecoms companies, where they can have a chatbot created based off of their CEO or their best salesperson or someone else in their team, maybe from the marketing team or a brand ambassador that can be there as a chat bot on their website or in their community channels as an interactive tool. So it puts the humanity back into the AI and actually gives it personality. It lets the customers get to know the people behind the project without, taking up anyone's time.
That's interesting. So, here's the way I kind of envision. Like, does this mean that, for example, let's say that I'm a company and I have a marketing director that's been with us for 10 years, and
Mhm.
he's done a great job, but he's moving on to something else, and I'm like, oh, like this sucks. We can't keep him. We can't afford him. And he knows all these things. He knows everything about us and our brand, and he just has, and he's always been really good with the team and everything. Is this a tool that could be used to say, hey, before you leave, right? We'd love to simulate your brain and put it into this sensei so that we can have that help training the next person. I mean, is that kind of a use case for this? How does that work? And I mean, are people okay with it? Do they not have a choice, or is it just based off like their old emails or Slack, so you don't really need to talk to them? Like, where does that go?
Welcome to the problem that we have at Sensei, where there are a million ideas and you get pulled down every rabbit hole possible. But funny enough, you hit the nail right on the head in terms of what we're looking at building next. So this concept around knowledge transfer of exactly that. Marketing director has been in a company for 10 years, has not just the stuff they have in their emails and their Slack, but they have this huge amount of industrial knowledge, this tacit knowledge, this understanding of what they do, the thought process behind it, and how they approach certain things, and their knowledge of customers, clients, projects, team members that isn't written down anywhere. And how do you capture that in a way that doesn't mean that it walks out the door because of baby boomers retiring or going on to a different job? And so this is actually a concept that we're validating right now, and have built 95% of the tech for, and will be rolling out later this year because it's needed by every company around the world. That knowledge of these key people, like 10% of people in every organization hold about 80% of the knowledge from that organization. And very few companies, organizations, and even governments are actually, competent at capturing that. Maybe they have an offboarding interview or some kind of like handover doc, but it's practically useless. So what if you can apply this replication tech to capture them and then have that available as an interactive knowledge base going forward? Not necessarily with their face, their voice, their style, because when you do that, you get into this whole, weird psychological thing that we have as humans where we kind of feel like, oh, there's an image of me that's still alive in the company. I should have some ownership of that, or I should have, I don't know, something there, or I don't want that. I don't want it saying, acting, and talking as if it's me. But if you could just focus on just the knowledge and make that available going forward, I think that there's, a huge opportunity there that most companies have zero idea on how to solve.
Okay, so that does kind of actually solve what my next question was a little bit, which was how do you account for knowledge and personality drift, essentially, right? So in the case where we talk about Steve Jobs, that is a person where their image, like it's a person where arguably would stay consistent throughout the course in the company. But since Steve Jobs is no longer with us, the AI would be creating new memories, new knowledge, new interactions, which it has to remember and then base more, actions and speech after that based on the previous. So it starts to become slowly drifting away from the original, which is what humans are, right? Like I'm not the same person I was when I was 15, neither are you, right? So I guess that it makes sense if you're only grabbing the knowledge base and then using it in any kind of made up avatar so that there isn't like, oh no, that's Janet from accounting from 10 years ago. Like, okay, great. But in the use cases where you do have an estate, where it is someone like Steve Jobs or who else, if you fill in the blank here, how would the AI compensate or does it not? Because it allows for that drift because that's natural with us too.
So this is the other side of what we do. There's, a lot of fun. There's a lot of philosophical concepts that come into this. And I studied philosophy at university, so I enjoy it. A lot of philosophy of identity, of language, of existentialism, and just like, humanity and who we are. And so when you talk about this idea of identity carrying on and even being a representative of them, there's different aspects of that in terms of who owns that identity, who has the right to then use it, and how do we actually even track that, especially with interactions and generations of the sort of responses it gives, all the way through to if you have a replica of a Steve Jobs type, that can be there. And it also depends on the use case. Obviously, it could be used internally, externally, however you want it. Um, there's a huge amount of interesting concepts that go into how the around the identity of the replica, where it's used, how it's used, whether or not it's a real person or a fictional character. I use the example of George Clooney's Nespresso personality for the
Mhm.
adverts quite a lot as an example of how this could be used as a marketing tool, as a sales tool for their website. Have that character welcoming you to the Nespresso website, saying, "Hello, come with me, and let me take you on a journey to find your perfect Nespresso and your perfect machine." And that suave, amazing character.
You did
And
it
so
really well, by the way. It was just hard to tell the difference between you and George Clooney just now.
I get it all the time. I just walk down the street and someone's like, "Hey, George," I'm like, "Ah, so sorry." But no, it really is, one of those fascinating concepts around, on the one hand, if you look at just knowledge transfer, that's a very small part of what you do, what we do. And then when you do look at adding the personality back in for certain use cases and for certain reasons, who owns the IP of that? Where's the, does that affect it? And then the other bit that you kind of accidentally touched on is this concept of, do you treat it as a static bot with the knowledge that it had at the time that it left, died or whatever? Or do you let it be dynamic? Do you let it evolve with the company, with the knowledge, with the time, with the language changing? And you're definitely right as well about philosophy of language there, because already, because of most people's interactions with AI day to day, just with ChatGPT and Claude and the likes of that, already our language and the way we interact with each other and the way we text and write and the way we Google or search for information has already changed. So our language has already changed as a society, and it will continue to change as this technology becomes more ingrained in our life and what we use it for.
What about you talk about external? Because the first thing, when we were scheduling this podcast, I was like, oh, this is really cool because, again, when you have people leaving, or for businesses that are trying to cut expenses and they can't afford a full staff anymore, but they also can't afford not to have that knowledge base. And maybe they pay them a bonus or something, or give them some sort of, severance exchange. Say, hey, listen, we'll give you 6 more months of severance if you give us your brain, basically, right? Like, if you allow us to use all this knowledge, or maybe they don't need the allow. I don't know. I mean, when you have communications within a business and their Slack and their email, I think they technically own those communications, but it does become a gray legal area where it's like, well, but that's a personality. So anyway, I'm sure that there's people who have to figure that out. But my big question is, what about the external use? Like, for example, I've been doing digital marketing 25 years, right? I have an agency, so I'm not up for grabs for like a CMO position anywhere because I like what I do. But what if I were to like somehow, take everything I've ever said, all the videos I've made, all the speeches, TV interviews, podcasts, emails, anything that's my knowledge base of and my thought process, and I were to package it, and then some other company that can't afford a CMO with 25 years of experience maybe they're a startup, right? And they can't afford someone, of my marketing pedigree, for example, but they want that knowledge base. Am I able to license that out? Is that something you guys already do, or is that on a roadmap? Is that something you're not going to touch?
And ladies and gentlemen, that is what we do at Sensei. So,
Okay.
we're just going to clip that, and then we're just going to put that into our sales package and say, you
Wonderful.
you want this? This is what we do. Yeah, so that's fundamentally the idea. We have that a lot with business coaches and just coaches in general who want to capture their coaching style, their knowledge, their experience to make it available to their clients at a cheaper price as a kind of accompaniment to what they're doing. We have a few authors come through who create replicas of themselves or their books as an accompaniment to the book while people are reading. So this whole idea of capturing you, your personality, and making it available either as a chatbot in a social platform like Telegram or Discord, or as a website widget for your website, or as a private page on your website, which you would only give access to certain people to. All of this can already be done with what we have at Sensei. So, that's where we're at now. There are a lot of, steps forward because where we want to get to is this whole idea of completely autonomous virtual humans. But there's a long, long way to go to get there. But in terms of what you're talking about capturing your knowledge or your experience, scraping your YouTube videos, websites, uploading your documents, and making that available to certain people, that is our bread and butter and what we have now.
How do you address someone's concern that once the genie's out of the bottle, they can't put it back in? So to speak. So let's say I download all my of me and my information and I license it. Well, I'm just hoping and assuming that whatever advice it gives that person or that company is something I would actually advise. How do I, or how do you guys address my concern that I'm like, well, how do I know it's giving the advice I would actually give if they talk to me right now? Because like, how can I guarantee that it is grabbing new information and seeing it and interpreting it the way that I would, and thus giving the type of advice that I would instead of sending someone down the wrong road that would be different than if they had just talked to me personally. That would be a concern I can imagine someone having. How do you address that?
My answer is usually the same for this question. It's, how do you address that with staff that you employ to do the same thing?
True.
It's it,
Yeah.
it's training, it's learning. They make mistakes, you retrain, you learn from it and you improve. We with AI, obviously, there are elements that we can add in. So we have built a hallucination checker, so it double checks the information to show the data sources to make sure that it's saying the right thing. And then we're actually working on a human in the loop feedback system for continuous training. So this would be in your example, you've licensed out your marketing bot, your JC bot, if you will,
Mhm.
to Sensay as a company. And we asked JC bot a question about, what would you do in a scenario that you need to market to, I don't know, baby boomers who are leaving directly. And JC bot maybe doesn't have the, or we say baby boomers in, I don't know, in Scotland. JCBot doesn't necessarily have that information directly. So what it would do is it would actually message you and it would say, JCBot's being asked XYZ. What would you say? That would then go back into the overall training as well as respond to the user so that instead of them actually having to come and ask you, you're actually retraining your bot with information it didn't have that it has been asked on. And then it will continually learn that going forward and have that going forward.
So I
So
still have a direct line as a backup, basically.
you
So if I license my bot to 10 companies, I mean, it's probably good living
would
if I
still
charge right.
exactly. Exactly. You would still be able to update the training on the back end right now, but in the future, we're looking at having that more like sort of automatic, so that it might even text you, it might even send you a WhatsApp or a text saying, "Oh, JC Bot's been asked this. What would you respond? And please try and respond in a few minutes so that the user isn't, lost away." It gives
Yeah,
you that feedback. You understand that someone's asking it that question. Everything else it will be asked will should be already be in the data, and so aside from that, we also have really strong benchmarking abilities to test the quality of how much is in there based on the amount of data you've given it.
that's really cool. I mean, it's this is one of those podcasts where I wish we that I did it like, Huberman, where he just goes 3 hours, or Joe Rogan, because I feel like there's just no way we're gonna cover everything that my mind is spinning with right now on this. But I'm gonna rewind a little bit here. Tell us a little bit about like what was that like? What made you even start this company? Were you at corporate doing something and you were like, oh man, I wish we had, we lost John, and damn it, John knew everything. How can we stop this madness from happening again? And you said, aha, AI. Like, I mean, what was your reason for starting this? What was your motivation? And then, how young is the company or old? How are you guys doing? Yeah, let's back up a little.
There's a lot of questions rolled up in one there. Um, My stories about when it comes to Sensei is a bit more personal. So I actually, severely got, well, I was studying philosophy anyway, university. I think I mentioned that. And I had an accident where I actually hit my head pretty hard and got concussed for pretty severely. And it cost me my memory for like 2 days, like 48 hours of just not being able to remember things, like having a word on the tip of your tongue, having memories that you couldn't just quite reach. They were just there, but like I couldn't get,
Infuriating.
and it was infuriating, it was terrifying, and it just made me realize how fleeting like our memories, our stories can be, and how much of us is our stories and our memories. And so that had always kind of like stayed weighed in the back of my mind alongside the philosophy I'd been studying. And I actually ended up writing two books that were kind of an existential quarter life crisis search for a meaning in life, but ended up being this sort of journey through how people have preserved themselves and their stories and how they extend themselves beyond their physical bodies throughout history, and how that we are part of this golden generation where we have enough data about stuff, photos, videos, voice recordings, tracking history of who we are, to apply that with a sufficiently advanced AI that could actually be us after we're gone. And so this whole concept of like digital immortality came out, and I wrote two books about it. The first one more philosophical, the second one more of a roadmap of, if this is possible, what would you need to do it and how would you do it? And then 2.5 years ago, with the sort of explosion of AI, and AI being more like 5, 10 years more advanced than anyone thought at the time, I was like, right, we've got to build it. And so the company is 2 years old, essentially. And yeah, I basically was working at that time. I always had the entrepreneurial bug. I mean, I'd built up a chain of 23 restaurants and bars across Europe, which sadly got taken out by the pandemic, and then was working in Web3 for a few years during the pandemic. And then just this, this culmination of everything coming together, the having written the books, the technology getting to that point and realizing, holy shit, if I don't do this, someone else will, and I'll be extremely upset that it's not me. And so we started building, and it's been 2 years of growing on following a path that no one's trodden before, and there's obviously a lot of unknowns that go with that, and so there's a lot of challenges. But this pathway towards creating these virtual humans, this digital immortality for myself as an extension of myself, is the goal that we're working towards.
It's interesting because I look at this from that, like you said, like legacy building in a way, right? There is a psychological need, at least more, I believe, for men than women. Like there is a gender disparity here in that kind of legacy of like, no, gotta have more
Mm.
me and more of my, make sure my ideas, stay and whatnot. And I think of it like there are people maybe who can't or don't have children, for example. And
Yeah.
I wonder if that hindbrain would be satisfied knowing that they've done this, right? Where it's like, yeah, I don't have kids, but I can still permanently impart my knowledge on either youth or profession, or, and again, and there's some other use cases I've seen with this technology where, and again, this gets kind of sidetracked in a little gray area too. It's like the ethical or moral or philosophical issues of, like if you pass, do you create a bot for yourself for your kids? Like, or should you just pass so that they can actually move on, right? You know what I mean? Like, and I think we're going to have this explosion of people for that purpose, leaving themselves. And again, if you're the kid, of course you're going to say yes. You don't want to lose your dad or your mom. And I say kid, they could be, teenagers, they could be adults, 50, 60 years old, and they lose their parents. And I wonder, where this goes with that. I mean, so I guess if you don't mind sidetracking for like 5 minutes, where do you're on mute, by the way, just so you know.
I,
Okay.
I, I love I
Where do
love
you,
sidetrack. It's
oh,
my
it's all right.
favorite.
Yeah. Where do
Um,
you see that part of it? And is that something you guys might spin off into another company or within Sensei? And like, I mean, it's such a hard debate. Where do you fall in that?
yeah. So with there's obviously a lot to unpack in that, and so like when it comes to this idea of creating essentially clones of people after or as they pass, after they pass, a lot of people are open to the idea of it. A lot of people who have contemplated their own mortality or want something to pass on, usually okay with it. Some people who haven't really thought about it are a bit creeped out. And that's normal. We fill up that need for legacy with either sometimes religion, sometimes with your kids, sometimes it's success, sometimes it's fame, sometimes it's things like autobiographies or leaving, whatever it is. It might be building a building or leaving a bench somewhere. Everyone has their own version of that. And I'm not saying this should be for everyone. And when you talk about like how people view it and accept it, there is a real like slight weirdness for immediate family. So this is like one of the when say your parents just died, there's this sort of weird thing about like having a replica of them to interact with now in that it's a psychological issue that we still find it weird. It's very uncanny valley, and you're right, it might not actually help with the mourning process of moving on. So we don't really look at it as that, and I don't look at it as that. I look at it as the generation after, or the generation after that.
Mhm.
Because we have got to a point in civilization where we've lost the ability to tell stories. We've lost the ability to pass down knowledge of previous generations. So unless your great grandfather or great grandmother was particularly famous, rich, or some kind of like other metric that we currently value, you know very little about them. You might know their name, you might know where they lived. That's pretty much it. You don't know their stories, you don't know their entire life. They might have lived to the age of 100, and you probably know three things about them.
Mhm.
And but there's a curiosity in us to know where we came from and who we came from. And so when we talk about creating this digital legacy, this digital immortality, it's not just for the nearest and dearest at the time, which some people might value, some people, some people might prefer that to just go moving on with their lives. It's talking about 2 or 3 generations down the line and having that available for them as a way of getting to know who they came from and where. Like I would love to get to know my great grandparents. I'd love to, beyond that, like 3, 4, 5 generations back. But unfortunately, we can't. But we can be the first generation who can offer that to future generations to have.
So almost like building a future digital ancestors,
Oh, yeah,
in a way,
exactly.
right? Yeah, that's really interesting, right? And there's always that quote of like, planting a tree of which shade you will never sit under, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I really like that. I do want to talk about let's. Now we'll stop sidetracking, but it's so hard not to with this topic. I love it. Um, for you guys, what kind of struggles did you did you have in the beginning, and what are you dealing with now, and like what are kind of the solutions?
I mean, this is not really a sidetrack now that you frame it with that question, because that's exactly the biggest issue with this. As soon as you're looking at creating virtual humans, there are so many rabbit holes to fall down. There's so many different routes this can take, and so many different ideas you can get excited about day to day, and so many different ways that technology like this could be applied. And so one of the biggest issues we've had consistently, we're a lot better at dealing with it now, but one of the biggest issues we've had consistently throughout the last 2 years has been staying focused and staying like and identifying which markets to go after and how to build something. And especially when we're building something completely new, we fall prey to shiny object syndrome very often. We find it very easy to get distracted with what we think is going to be a great idea without properly validating it first. And so yeah, that historically that's been the biggest issue. Like, should we go after the healthcare market and look at dementia patients for having
Oh,
a replicas of them and also of their closest people around them to keep them company throughout the day? Do we look at education? Do you look at replicating the leading minds of the world and making them available to people who would never be able to afford the same education elsewhere? Do you look at interactive NPCs for gaming, running around GTA 6 when it comes out and actually interacting with JC bot or Dan bot on the
wow.
street and then murdering them? Um,
There's a lot of people who would take you up on that with me. I got to tell you, I think I'd be the most murdered bot. I don't know if that's a flex, but I'll put my if I could to be in GTA 6, that'd be cool.
That'd be great. But I mean that would be possible, or even repopulating old games. Some of these old
Yeah.
like sort of the first games you got to play that had these virtual worlds that are now empty, but repopulating them with people's AIs. So there's loads of different things that this can be applied to, and we've got 50 different verticals we've identified that you could apply this to. And so staying focused was definitely a struggle. Along with the typical classic business struggles, finance, hiring the right
Are
people.
you guys VC funded? Are you bootstrapped? Where are you guys financially on that?
We have an interesting story there as well. It's a very fun one. Our topic. I bootstrapped the company myself for the first 9 months, and then we actually did a crypto token sale as essentially a crowd-funded pre-seed round, which ended up raising 3.4 million last April.
Wow. Okay, so you guys are, I imagine that that's a good thing, obviously, but this might enable your shiny object syndrome because once you have the funding to do the one thing that keeps creatives in check is a lack of funds to do all the things that our brains want to do, right? Like that's almost a problem getting that money. You're like, oh crap, maybe we could do all that.
Yes, exactly. That had happened. We got very good at realizing that quite quickly, luckily. But yes, that did happen, as well as probably overhiring at times, and also without it coming from VCs directly, it did mean that there was no direct accountability, which meant on the one hand we were free to build the project as we wanted to and as we saw fit. But obviously, there wasn't that constant nagging in the back of your head about like, when are we getting our money back? When are we making money? What's happening with this?
There's
So
good and bad things to that. I mean, I think VCs keep you on your toes, but at the same time, having that kind of anxiety can also lead to quick, poor decisions as well,
very true. So there's and there's
and
plenty of
short-term decision making instead of long-term.
horror stories out there about VC funding and how people have like suffered because of it. So, I think we were very lucky to do as well as we did with that, and a few of us came from a Web3 background, so it definitely helped. But it was, yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate to raise as much as we did via that platform, which essentially is putting our own money back into it and continuing to build it with that. But we will be looking to do a proper equity round probably later this year, actually, as we finish validating this other concept, which we believe can be a real, essentially a real huge win for a lot of organizations. But we will need the support to get to that the next step with that.
Nice. Well, so now let's pivot then and talk about how you're growing, right? Like you've got funding, you've got great ideas. You've been around 2 years. You've already implemented a lot of this stuff. What are you guys doing to get the word out? I mean, you're on the podcast, cool, great, but what else? I mean, what kind of marketing are you guys investing in? What kind of marketing maybe didn't work before? And what are you going to be leaning on in the future to get eyeballs on Sensei?
It's very funny. It's a very topical conversation. This and it also talks to the previous point about spending money unnecessarily. Um, but luckily, it was my own money this time. I just bought an island in the Philippines, and we are instilling a AI government that we've built using Sensei replicas as a way of showcasing how AI governments can run probably better and more efficiently than real people
Wait, how
govern.
much did the island cost? I want to know what are islands in the Philippines going for these days?
Islands, surprisingly, islands around the world are not actually as expensive as you think. You could pick up an island for less than an apartment.
Well, I guess because there's no infrastructure, right? I mean, you could get a really cheap one, and there's no plumbing, there's no electricity, right? Okay, so
But
you, so
let's say it's on that. Let's say it's on that level. Yeah, you know, we're not talking a Mr. Beast island here. We're talking like a zero plumbing,
so
electricity.
you're gonna be the sovereign nation of Sensei. Like, how does that work?
Essentially, Sensei Island is planning to be has become its own micronation island in the Philippines that has its own AI government that will have e-residence and the full works.
That is that okay, that's its own podcast. We can't even go down that road. We don't have the time, Dan. What are you doing with
We're
me
talking
right
about
now?
we talk about marketing. So right now
Marketing. Here we go. Back to
Right.
marketing. Back to marketing.
Right now we have, the main product we're selling is these interactive chatbots and widgets that, are hyper personalized and it's super interesting. We can talk about virtual humans and things like that, but it's not quite ready yet. And we wouldn't be, willing to or able to push those out as they are. And also there's a public fear of AI and perception of being replaced. So if you start talking about virtual humans, people automatically start thinking there's the fear there. So we have to be creative with our marketing. We have a great community that we leverage for marketing a lot of the time. And we, do all the typical stuff you should do, adverts and targeting and understanding pain points and customer messaging. And, we're not perfect at it and we're still learning a lot and it's still got a long way to go. But then we have these creative sessions where we try and come up with like what's the craziest, wackiest thing we can do to get, some attention and awareness. And so the island, funny enough, was actually one that got shot down by the team, but I liked it so much anyway. I've taken it on as a personal project and ended up calling it Sensei Island and using Sensei to build out the government for this. So it's more of a personal initiative, something that I actually wanted to do anyway, because one of my sort of philosophical papers was around if you were to create a nation from scratch today, how would you do it? And so it's kind of an extension of that. So it kind of ties back into my philosophy in a way. I definitely don't have the time to do this properly. So it's very, very funny that I'm trying to do it at the same time. But yeah, that all that will tie back in Sensei because it will hopefully appeal to governments to reach out to us and work with us on how they can adopt AI think tanks for themselves. Hopefully, it enables tourism boards to create replicas and chatbots based off of famous people from their country. So imagine, I don't know, having Frida Kahlo as your guide to Mexico City.
Hmm.
Having these famous characters that do get paid their licensing fees to their families that we can create as interactive chatbots that can then be used by the governments themselves or by the tourism boards as a way of interacting with people becomes a whole market in itself for what we already have.
That's amazing. What are your growth goals for the next 12 months? Like where you don't have to tell us where you're at financially right now, but I mean, do you want to double, triple? Like what's a healthy growth curve for you guys if we have this conversation again in a year?
I mean, it's the impossible question. If you'd asked me that a year ago, I wouldn't say we're here. We've gone from 10 to about 50 people plus advisors and additional contractors. If we are still building on that same path towards virtual humans and I still feel like we are working towards that, I think that's, growth and success for us. Obviously there's going to be a lot of hiccups along the way. There's going to be, a lot of issues and challenges. But for us, in terms of growth, revenue, I mean, it hopefully it becomes exponential. Hopefully I mean, we are launching this much larger product. We have these chatbots and widgets, which are great now, but they are individual sales one by one, and it's there's a challenge to that as well because everyone wants them to be extremely personalized to them, and so there's a lot to learn, which is great for our tech stack. But in terms of sales, it is a struggle. Um, but with this idea of knowledge transfer, as we were talking about before, with one company alone, you look at a telecom company with 200,000 people who work there. Out of that, you've probably got 30 to 40,000 of them leaving in the next 10 years, of which maybe 10, 20% of them are key people. So you're looking at like somewhere between 6 to 8,000 employees or key employees leaving in the next 5 to 10 years. That knowledge is going to be walking out the door. So for us, those are much bigger wins in terms of landing a few enterprise clients like that, or even governments that have the same issue, so that we can actually make this like offboarding knowledge base and interactive knowledge base available to them. So by launching that, even with a few clients, we'll it will by far and large engulf the current sort of revenues that we've grown to so far.
Yeah, I mean that's an incredibly scalable idea right there for sure. I mean, it wouldn't take even that many clients to just go through the moon on that one. What about the technology? This might be even a harder question, right? But in let's say in the next 3 years, because I honestly I think anything past that would be almost out of our comprehension at the pace of its advancement. Where do you see the technology you're using in the next few years? And that can include competitors, like other people entering the space and what they would do with that, right? Like, again, people may be using it specifically for, when people die and a way like for therapy, coping, or to keep loved ones around. Like, there's so many different use cases. Where
Yeah.
do you see this technology and this ability that you're harnessing right now being in the next few years?
So I have a nice diagram that I usually show at this kind of point, where it shows our what we call an AI brain map, basically what we're building at Sensei, all the different data inputs, the different types of data input that goes into it, what we call our wisdom engine in the center. This is essentially the Sensei engine, the bit that powers the replicas, the thought machine behind it. So it's the large language models, it's the RAG data storage, it's the reasoning, it's the theory of mind, it's the intent behind it, the personality, the wisdom, all these different aspects that we are working on. And we're probably maybe 30 or 40% like through, or probably not even that, of like all of the things we want to build for that to make it this completely holistic virtual human brain. And then you've got the interaction. So whether it's a website widget or something that interacts with someone on Twitter or on Telegram, or can actually interact or help to manage your calendar or be a meeting recorder. And so there's different integrations and different things that go there. We're building it in a very modular way, but by building this AI brain, obviously we will not be able to accommodate all the different markets that we've even discussed here, let alone all the ones that are on the list of possibilities. So our goal is, and we have it now available as an API, so we can encourage other builders to build on top of us for different areas and solutions. So we actually just did an ed tech, education tech hackathon recently, where we've got two people who want to continue building out those education ideas. Coming up, we've got one around networking. So I love this idea because I hate going to conferences. They exhaust me to death. But imagine going to a conference where you've got 10,000 people, let alone some of the bigger ones where it's 100,000 people. And imagine that with the data you already give them, you can create a basic replica from your LinkedIn or from your who you are, what your company is, and what you're looking for. And then that replica of you would go around and network with all 100,000 other replicas from other people and come back to you with a nice curated list of like 50 people that you should speak to. Here's who you should speak to. Here's the business opportunities. Here's your talking points. And even here's where you should meet them at a certain
Kind of
time.
a digital conference with no people and just
But the parts still interesting, but taking out all the unnecessary conversations in between, taking
yeah.
out the people that you speak to, and you're like, oh, there's nothing here, and then but it still takes the energy away. So having a much more targeted approach to it, you still meet the right people, but it's yeah. So that for a network concept. So these all of these are different verticals and ideas that we could build ourselves, but obviously we're limited by time,
Yeah.
resource. So we actually open up our technology via API to people who want to train replicas and to have them, useful as chatbots for different use cases. And we give them suggestions as to, different ideas we've had along the way that we are trying to avoid now. Again, we've learned that lesson. And the way we got around learning that lesson was to say, why don't we open it up as an API? And if someone from the team wants to build out a concept, they can go and do it. If someone from a builder, an entrepreneur wants to come along and build out a specific use case for our technology, they can do it.
So, it's interesting. I usually ask someone, what advice can you give the listeners, and it's very general in that sense, right? You kind of pick from anything. But for you, I'm gonna ask, just because of how big and exponential this space that you're in is right now and is going to be, um, what advice do you have for anyone entering this space, like specifically this kind of like AI replication, of a human thought process or knowledge base? Like you said, there's so many different ways, and you're doing the smart thing by APIing it so that you can be that hub that others pull from for all their ideas that you can't obviously execute because there's just too many. But what advice would you give someone even just entering this space and or considering it?
Um, so I'm going to defer to my replica for this one. I've just typed in your question to him at the same time and asked Danbot, what
This is
advice would
perfect.
what advice would you give to someone entering the human replication space today? And let's see. He's given quite a thorough answer on this one. Um,
That'd be good.
He'd start with voice and conversational AI. He would focus on data quality and making sure that you're avoiding any garbage in, garbage out, and then focus on one use case first. Danbot knows more than I do.
Danbot's more disciplined than you are.
This is this is true. He's much better off. Expect regulatory headaches from day one. Ethics aren't optional, so you have to face that and make sure you're clear about them from the very start. And enterprise first. B2C is sexy, but B2B pays the bills.
It
Um,
does. Yeah.
and he also says don't say replicate or replace humans, say enhance human capabilities. The Danbot definitely has learned these lessons the hard way and has been trained very much on some of this experience. So yeah, the advice going into the space is move fast, and just start, I guess. It's an exciting space. I think the awareness will catch up when people start seeing the utility of this, and they will as soon as it's a bit like having the iPhone. When people complain about the iPhone, who really needs that? And then suddenly you see the capabilities, the practicality of it, and the just the ease of use of it all, and suddenly you're like, wow, all right, this is great. So
Yeah.
when people realize that someone else has got their AI doing their emails and their social posts and everything else for them while they're sat on a beach somewhere, you're going to be like, hang on a minute, I want that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like I don't remember if it was Steve Jobs or someone else who said if you ask someone, in the 1800s, what they wanted, when it would come, let's say, transportation, they would say a horse that could go 400 miles an hour. They wouldn't tell you to build a car, right? Like someone had to build the thing for you to realize, oh yeah, we actually do need that, right? Instead of just taking the current thing and like making it faster or better. And that's really what innovation is at its core, right? Listen, this has been fascinating. I wish I had more time. If I ever do a Joe Rogan style 5 hour one, you're gonna be my first guest because there's just, and we'll bring in pizza because we're gonna need breaks, right? A beer, and because it'll be a lot. It'll be a lot. We'll need maybe Adderall just to keep us focused. I mean, because at this, and Dan Bott's gonna have to join us because he clearly gets it better than you do, and way better than I do at this point. He's smarter. My JC Bot hopefully will be as disciplined as Dan Bot. Let's call them our better selves, right?
Yeah,
Um,
we'll get them both created. We'll get them in a conversation together and feed them the same questions and see what happens.
Okay, wait, quick side note, and this is only because this happened like the other day. They had a controlled study where they had three AI agents on phones and they put them next to each other with directives of one AI agent to ask the what it thought was a person and interact. But then when it realized it was an AI, they're like, "Oh no, we're both AI." And then they had to get permission to get like some new badge for an employee. So the third one in the middle was like, "Well, I'm the one who does that." And then they're like, "Oh, you're AI too." And they said, "Hey, do you want to switch to, I think it was like Gibber Speak or whatever the name of this was." And then it just switches and they start going like it's just wavelengths of sound, and they had their own language. And I'm like, oh man, I'm going to be so much nicer to my Alexa now because this is terrifying. They had their own language, Dan. They realized that they were all on the same side and they're like, hey, let's not talk in English anymore. We can't let the
Yeah,
humans hear this part. And I'm like, oh, we're so screwed.
human language is too inefficient. We need to speak in a much
Oh,
better way.
eh.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Where can anyone listening to this who's completely as blown away as I am, where can they find you specifically if they want to reach out and partner, buy from you, whatever, and then where can they find the company itself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm at Sensei Dan on pretty much every channel imaginable. So that's SENSAY, DAN. And then the company itself is at sensei.io or at Ask Sensei on any social media channel.
Does Danbot have his own socials yet?
No, but good point. No, he already manages mine, so it's fine. You can just if I don't reply, it would be me or Dan. But basically, if someone's really nice and the replies and writes you out a very thorough,
Yeah.
well-written response, it's you've got my nice AI rather than me. For me, it's like 3 word responses.
Well, see, then I think you need to train to be more like you. See, so you're training a better version of you, and that's not really the same thing, is it? Right? That's not
Dan,
really Dan then.
Danbot is how I would respond if I had time.
My JC bot will be sarcastic as shit, is my point, you know? Oh boy. Listen, for anyone else listening here who's had as much fun listen to this podcast as I've had talking with Dan and creating it. Listen, give it a 5-star rating, share it with somebody, because this is how tech nerds like you and I find really cool podcasts like this and technologies like Dan is working on. Dan, thank you so much for being on the show. And I can't wait for the post show here because I've got so many more questions, man.
I mean, well, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Bye bye.